Hi, welcome to Bake to the Future, the show where we examine what is happening in the baking industry with a future-focused lens. I'm Haley Blumenreich.
And I'm Katie Toole.
Today, we are bringing you the latest information about plastic packaging regulations and how they might impact the baking industry in certain states and beyond.
And to help us understand this topic, we have ABA's Rasma Zvaners, Vice President of Regulatory and Technical Services. Welcome, Rasma.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here today.
So several weeks ago, I know you brought up this topic in a staff meeting, and as you were explaining it, I thought to myself, oh my gosh, we need to talk about this some more. So maybe why don't we start with basically what you told everybody during the staff meeting, and then we will talk about it some more.
Okay, sounds like a plan. In the past 2 years, on the state legislative side, 4 states have already, as of this spring, actually early summer, California was the last one that finally did get signed into law, passed legislation that deals with packaging. And most of these pieces of legislation have 2 elements. One is they develop extended producer responsibility organizations. So this is a product stewardship program for those that use plastics, generate plastics, make plastics. And then there's a second piece to it that is often called the rates and dates. In other words, each state at some point will develop regulations that indicate what percentage of packaging that is used in that state needs to have recyclable content. So those are sort of the 2 buckets. And as of this year, we now have legislation that has passed in Maine, Oregon, California, and Colorado. Looking forward a little bit, we do anticipate that this is going to continue as we move into the 2023 legislative season. I think, and the state legislative side, most states have already recessed for the year, and except for a couple. So we do see this as an ongoing activity. So I thought maybe what I could do is just kind of summarize a little bit what each of these states is doing and some key dates that folks may just want to be aware of as we head down the path.
That sounds like a super idea. Yeah.
Before you get to that, could you maybe, you mentioned, I think you said 4 states. So would the things you're about to talk about apply to bakers who distribute in those states or who bake in those states?
Everybody.
Everyone. So that's why it matters, because you might distribute in a different state than you produce.
Correct. And I think, the one thing that I will say is that there are so many, think of it as an onion. There are so many levels to these pieces of legislation that have been put in place that I could spend like 2 hours talking about one state program. So I'd like to give you sort of the Cliff Notes version of it, or I think what did my daughter say? They're now called Spark Notes. So, you won't pass test, but you'll have some good background information.
Perfect. So no test at the end.
That's right. So for purposes of Maine, the Maine legislation covers all packaging. Now recognize that, some of these states have now designated, some have definitions, some have left that broad and have designated that their departments of environmental protection have to now develop programs that will suit what the legislation is. So we don't have all of the details yet, but we do have a good sense. So Maine applies to packaging, which is a very broad definition. Oregon addresses packaging, print paper, and food serviceware. California looks at single-use packaging, plastic food serviceware, and then Colorado looks at packaging and paper products. I think the one thing that is really important for our members to recognize is that after 2 years of these states working on legislation, there is not one consensus model. All 4 are different, which creates a challenge.
That sure does make it easy.
Well, yeah. So I'm going to talk about 2 key elements that all of these programs have, and then, touch on a couple of dates that folks may just be thinking about longer term. So each one of these state legislations does implement what's called a producer responsibility organization. So this is where producers and users have to pay a fee to participate. in this organization, and that is what's driving the revenue generation for those organizations. And again, each state has different ways that they're setting this up, and each state also has a different level of how much industry can participate in these producer responsibility organizations. So, for example, Oregon and Colorado are very similar in that producers have an ability to get involved in the program and its implementation and some oversight. The state of Maine, for example, they develop the producer responsibility organization's rules and requirements through the Department of Environmental Protection. And then California lets producers play a role in developing the producer responsibility organization, but also has a large role for Cal Recycle to have a large involvement in the process. I think the other thing that's unique is Colorado, the one of 4 states, also has, instead of just moving forward to develop the regulations on how these producer responsibility organizations will run, sort of what are the guidelines, who's going to participate, what's the frequency of their meeting, how are the fees going to be established. Colorado went in a slightly different direction where they have designated an advisory board with an executive director that has to review several different options and then take it back to the state legislature for the legislature to either approve it or disapprove it or recommend something different. So I think just in those few minutes of kind of covering things, you get a sense that there's not a lot of continuity here. It's very different, which is part of the challenge that we're seeing right now and things that we need to be thinking about as we move forward. So for timelines, those are a little closer in place. So for example, for Maine, by 2025, the state needs to have the regulations in place. And the first payments from participants would likely happen in late 2026. Oregon has to have their program in place by 2025, July of 2025. Colorado also has designated July of 2025. But it also does have language in there that says it will be somewhere between July 2025 to January of 2026, where you actually have to be involved in this producer responsibility organization and begin paying fees. California, their timeline for starting to pay fees is in July of 2027, but the organization has to be established by January of 2024. So this is sort of the best way to look at it is we're working with a patchwork of legislation that has passed in 4 different states. We anticipate that in the next calendar year, we're going to have additional activity. And it's one of those things that we're wondering when is at the federal level something may happen. And I do feel that within the next couple of years, we'll see some more federal activity. So far, from the legislative side in Congress, there's been limited finalization of issues. We did have in the federal infrastructure bill that passed at the beginning of this calendar year, there was some funding given to EPA to begin doing some additional education on recycling. But we do have additional pieces of legislation. There's the Advanced Recycling Research and Development Act of 2021, which is a bipartisan bill moving forward, encouraging the federal government to develop standards for waste reduction and for plastic recycling. But I don't really feel that the legislation is really going to build momentum until there's more pressure at the state level because of the inconsistencies or kind of the mushrooms, popping up all over the U.S. I think very closely to what we had to deal with when Vermont developed the GMO legislation, and then we ultimately ended up having a federal program that sort of leveled the playing field and everybody knew where things would play out. And my gut tells me that we'll ultimately get there with producer responsibility as far as recycled content as well, but it's just going to take a little more time.
About how long did that take for the BE labeling? Like, that's what you're talking about?
Mm-hmm.
About how long did that take from Vermont doing their thing to it becoming?
I would have to go back and look through my notes, but I want to say it was a couple of years. It's not something that was immediate. I do think, there has been, one of the ways that we participate in this, because it is such a huge undertaking, and ABA is one trade association in addition to other trade associations in the food sector, some individual, companies themselves, both producers of packaging, those that use packaging. We belong to a group called Ameripen, that has been an amazing resource for us in helping us guide our way through this plethora of regulations, legislation, what do we need to be keeping our eye on? And, they've been able to help keep us focused on this. And they've had some conversations and also have a sense that this will take place at the federal level. But again, it's just a matter of, when does the pot of water boil over where you need to have somebody else kind of step in and assist with this.
And in terms of what this could mean for the baking industry specifically, it clearly is going to impact all industries and sectors. But what do you see kind of happening when this all starts to have to be enacted in 2 to 3 years? How do you anticipate bakers adjusting?
So I think two points on that. One, obviously, if you're in a state that has one of these programs, you will need to be participating in a producer responsibility organization, so a stewardship program, and that will require you to pay a certain amount of fee or a certain fee into the program. Those fees have yet to be established based on the regulations that each of these states will be developing. So that's one piece of it. I think the other piece is also, I mentioned this early on, the rates and dates, as far as states having specific requirements. Say by X date, you need to have a certain amount of recyclable content in the packaging that you use. I think we, as the baking sector, are in a bit of a unique situation. Obviously, our baked goods, we use bags for the product. We can't go backwards to paper. We have to be very careful with the sort of packaging that we do use for, food safety issues in particular. But I do think that a lot of our member companies are looking at improving or, how can they gain more packaging that does have recycled content. I think this is, somewhat kind of a bit of a competitive, element of our sector as they each kind of strive towards their own individual goals in helping with sustainability, reducing their packaging, and moving those issues forward as individual bakers.
So time to panic yet?
Not time to panic yet. I think, one of the things that I would recommend is certainly, engage with ABA. Our energy and environment group is tracking the packaging activities. We have had several updates on this, and our next session is in November. I'm not certain we'll be covering packaging then, but we will try to do one of our 1-hour sessions this next calendar year specifically focused on where we are with packaging issues. The other piece is also we have our State Affairs Working Group that is closely monitoring these issues as well. So we do try to get as much information as we can out to our members as these things are evolving and changing. But certainly, feel free if you would like additional information to reach out to us, and we can certainly connect you either with myself or Lee Sanders, who's helping with the State Affairs Working Group.
Awesome. And if members want to reach out, they can email hello@americanbakers.org, or you can send us messages that way, or membership@americanbakers.org to reach the membership team directly. And I think, do you have anything else to add, Rasma?
No, I just think that this is something that has definitely taken off in the past couple of years. We don't see it slowing. If anything, I'll just be curious when it sort of tries to gain a little more momentum at the federal level.
Mm-hmm. And I think, too, in IBIE in a few weeks, maybe we'll see some different packaging solutions there. So we'll see.
Yeah, interesting times.
For sure.
Yeah, well, stay tuned. And we really appreciate you coming on to help us break down this complicated topic, but so important for our members to know about.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity.
Awesome. Well, you can let us know what you thought of the show by emailing hello@americanbakers.org or leave us a voicemail at baketothefuture.org. And don't forget to subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts: Apple, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, Amazon Music, or Ghana.